Welcome to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast with Darren Mitchell. If you're a sales leader looking to take your leadership to a whole new level, then this is the podcast for you. We'll be exploring tips, techniques, and strategies to help you take your leadership to the exceptional level and allow you to enjoy more money, more meaning, and better sales results. Welcome back to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast. Darren Mitchell here on a Friday here in Australia, but who I'm speaking to today, it is Thursday evening. Mr. Chris Pierre, all the way from Ohio in the United States. Welcome to the podcast, my friend.
Darren, thanks for having me.
Now, we're just talking before we press record that it's about 9 a.m. here in Melbourne, and that makes it about 6 p.m. on Thursday where you are. So it's just gone past beer o'clock, and and so this conversation is standing between you and the first. I don't know, what's your choice of, is it some sort of Pilsner or draft beer? That's if you drink beer.
Probably have to be an IPA.
An IPA.
Yeah.
Wow. Like it. It's amazing, isn't it, how many different beers there are today compared to even 20 years ago. All these draft beers and craft beers and IPAs and XPAs. Sensational. But guess what? We're not here to talk about beer. We're here to talk about sales and sales enablement. For the listeners, Chris, you are the founder and CEO of G8P and also Sync Show, marketing firms that are focused on creating profitable marketing strategies for B2B companies tired, and I love this, tired of wasting money on marketing that doesn't deliver results. So it's going to be a fascinating conversation because there's so many people I talk to who are struggling with how do they get the right penetration of the marketplace, how do they get the mind space of their customers, their ideal customers, but then how do they convert those customers into profitable, long, sustainable customers. So it's going to be a fantastic conversation. For the listeners, love to, as a first sort of introduction, just give us a little bit of a background on the life according to Chris Pierre. Now, this is not going back to when you were 5 years old, but love to know what the background of you is that led you to doing what you're doing today, particularly creating the companies that you've created and the work that you do.
Yeah, no, thank you. My background was I was actually a graphic designer out of college. So I was in the marketing world early in my career, and I worked for American Greetings, the card company, literally designing cards and helping in that process. And then as my career matured, I realized I had this entrepreneurial itch. My father was the president of several manufacturing companies, and so manufacturing kind of was in my blood, and his leadership, at those companies was kind of in my blood. And so in my late 20s, early 30s, I branched out on my own and I started my own agency, and therein started this whole 20 plus years of insanity.
Wow.
So
and you didn't start the consultancy and greeting cards, did you? Design?
No. When I first started, we were focused on corporate identity and branding. That was my passion, like logo, branding and messaging. And then as the world changed in the internet, I'm going back 20 plus years when the internet was really just kind of being used for business. They didn't even have video online yet, and so we kept morphing and adjusting over time. And it was at a conference probably in 2008. I was listening to a keynote speaker, and he said, "Sales is the lifeblood of every company, and marketing is arts and crafts." And I got really upset. I was pissed off. And to some degree, he was accurate, and it really bothered me. So I went on this journey to prove that marketing can drive an ROI or return on investment, and that marketing can have significant contributions to sales and business development efforts. And that's what we do today.
Wow. And through that process that got you to that level of frustration in the work as a designer, were you involved, or did you get involved, or did you observe the marketing side, or did you feel as if the work that you were doing in terms of the design work and getting involved in the process was a great introduction to marketing, which then naturally led you to, I guess, that thought process when he said, well, hey, marketing's art and craft, but we just need to have sales in every business.
So it was a metamorphosis. So when I started my company, I was doing a lot of the work myself. I was a sole proprietor, and my first hire was a graphic designer, which allowed me to get out of graphic design and start selling and running a company. And so then it just kept morphing. Today we have about 20 people, 20 employees, and we have clients all across the country and across the world. So when I started meeting with business owners and VPs, vice presidents of sales, they started asking me a lot more questions beyond branding and corporate identity. And, it got into like, well, how are you going to help me sell?
Yeah.
How can I get the word out? How can I attract more leads from my business? And so that's what we did over the last 20 years. We just kept improving our processes. And then that ultimately led to the Great 8 Pillars, which is our framework that we developed. And I just launched, you see the book behind me on the shelf. We launched that book, published it last July.
Yeah. Okay. And with that metamorphosis, was it like, I don't know, what was is it the statue of David that was just chipped away, and all of a sudden there was this magnificent structure in front of the sculptor? Or was it something that was tangible that you actually intentionally created? So the Great 8 Pillars, which we'll talk about, was it something that was as a result of that metamorphosis that you realized, hey, this is something that is unique in the marketplace? Or was it something that you were tangibly building?
No, it was very purposeful.
Okay.
I always had this inherent need to add value to our customers. I didn't want to be a creative agency, so to speak. And there's nothing wrong with creative agencies. I didn't want that for my company.
Yeah.
I wanted companies to grow and scale and us be a part of that. And so as we started looking at marketing, I kept thinking like, well, how can we do things differently? What are other agencies doing that aren't moving the needle, and how can we be different? And so we started implementing different systems and processes and constantly challenging ourselves as to, well, why didn't this work? Or why did it work?
Yeah.
And how can we multiply that and do it better?
Yeah.
And so it was a metamorphosis, but it was a very intentional, purposeful metamorphosis.
Because you were testing and measuring, and the key part there was measuring, but also analyzing it, like probably forensically, as to why this worked and how do I break it down so I can actually duplicate it or identify any areas that perhaps it wasn't working as well that you could change.
Correct.
Yeah.
And as the internet and technology, advanced, we started getting more and more tools that we could add to our quiver to allow us to measure that or get the analytics or the data to support marketing. And what we realize is a lot of marketing agencies report on what I call vanity metrics versus ROI-driven key performance indicators.
Yeah.
And so we really honed in on that and perfected it to some degree. Yeah.
It's nice. It's just like, as you're saying that, the vanity metrics, it's just like all the people on social media that all they're fixated on is how many likes did I get, or how many impressions did I get? Yeah. It's not about that.
Well, and I will say, like, on the B2C side or as an influencer, yeah, sure. I mean, because you can get revenue based on some of those things, but for a B2B company, and how many likes you get or followers is just an indication of engagement of your content.
Yeah.
But you got to take it to that next level and make sure that you're tracking it down to, did it help me generate more business?
That's it. Because sales is the lifeblood of every business, right, Chris?
That's right.
That's a question I wanted to ask you in terms of that evolution for you as you're creating G8P and SyncShow, and the sales enablement, I guess, friction between often sales teams and marketing teams in an organization. And even with my own experience being in corporate for 20 plus years and being in sales for a lot of that time, the marketing department would always be separate, and sometimes on a completely separate floor. So there's this us versus them type of mentality. For you, as you were going through this process, And you mentioned before that when that keynote speaker mentioned those descriptions of sales and marketing, it was like, well, that's not great. What were some of the challenges that you had to, I guess, face so that, because my view is sales and marketing have to work together, not separately, because they rely as much on each other. And without both of them functioning really effectively, you don't have a successful business. So what were some of the, I guess, challenges that you found, and did you have to try and break down some barriers, whether that be education or mindset in the process?
Absolutely. A lot of it comes down to the culture at the companies we serve. So you can imagine there's all different levels of marketing and sales maturity at these organizations. And the companies that we specialize in working with on the B2B side are typically going to be, like, if we're looking for our ideal customer, about $50 million in revenue up to 500 million in revenue.
Okay.
We definitely have clients that are smaller than that, and we have clients that are bigger than that. But in that realm of company size, what we find is that most companies have a very immature marketing operation, and oftentimes the sales operation is not too far ahead of it. So they've been extremely successful with the way they've been doing things, but they get to a point to where they say, okay, we need to go to the next level for growth. Yep. How do we get there? And so having sales and marketing work closely together and really be one revenue generation team is really important. So we typically, like, our main point of contact at our customers is typically a VP of marketing or a VP of sales. And then we often work very closely with the sales team to understand, what are they seeing in the market? What are their conversations like with leads and customers? And then how do we help them close the gap and identify the key issues that need to drive, success? And that could be all the way from brand awareness and attracting business to closing that business.
Yeah. It's amazing that I was actually doing some master classes for some organizations recently, and it's amazing how many sales teams are still, even in 2024, quite reluctant to ask for the sale. And they expect that the marketing teams will provide all of the hot leads so that all the, I guess, the heavy lifting is done through the marketing team. And when sales don't close those, marketing turn around and say, we've just given you some of the hottest leads ever. They've been purely qualified. We've actually targeted our ideal perfect customer. And what are you guys doing? And sales turn around and say, those leads are shocking. So there's this internal bickering that tends to happen. We've got to get both organizations aligned more, I guess, more strategically. So from your point of view, what are you thinking about? How do we, because I look at, do we have to have KPIs that are aligned, right? Do we have to have sales and marketing kind of sharing the same budget? So both parts of the organization have skin in the games. Yeah. But equally, you mentioned before the head of marketing and head of sales. Are those guys aligned as well? Are they on the same page? What's your thoughts on that?
Yes, and yes. I mean, I agree with what you're saying as far as alignment and KPIs. However, you have to have the operational infrastructure in place to even get KPIs. So what I mean by that is we're a HubSpot Platinum partner. So we work exclusively with HubSpot for marketing automation and CRM and website development. And using a tool like HubSpot, if an organization is leveraging the CRM capabilities for their sales team, dashboards, reports, sales pipeline management, and marketing is using the tool for marketing KPIs and success, then we can get to work and have some fun. Yeah. Because then you can identify where the breakdown is in the process. I'll share a quick example story with you. We were recently working with a tool and die manufacturing company. About 75 million in revenue, great people, great product. And we've been working with them for about a year.
Yep.
And over that year, we had driven approximately $2 million of pipeline revenue. And about 1.2 million, if I remember correctly, had gone to quote or proposal.
Okay.
And a year later, after we've done this for a year, their leadership team called and said, "Hey, we're going to cancel services. We're not seeing the return on investment." So we said, "Okay, time out. Let's talk about this, because we're seeing a different picture on the marketing side.
Yeah.
Can you shed some light on the ROI equation?" And they said, "Well, we haven't closed any of this new business, and so we don't think the leads are that good." So, okay. But you quoted 1.2.
Yeah.
And you've qualified them in your pipeline. So let's go back and look at all those leads. Let's get your VP of sales and the president in the meeting. And we went through the leads. And what they said was, these are good leads. We did quote these. And by the way, they had a 36-month sales cycle.
Wow.
We'd only been working with them for 12. And so we said, well, now because we've helped you implement the CRM, let's look at the sales data. And what we found was they had a 2% close rate.
2%.
2% quote to close rate. And we said, you don't have a marketing issue, you have a closing issue.
Totally.
So then the question is, now that we have the data, now it's like, okay, well, where is that issue? Is it pricing? Is it timing? Is it bad leads?
Yeah.
Is it because you're not quoting the right things? Is it because, like, we had one customer that was incentivizing their sales team on the number of quotes they delivered, not on the sales closing, on the quotes. They were quoting everybody, everything they could.
Well, sales is a numbers game, Chris.
Exactly. So it's the lifeblood of the company.
Yeah, absolutely. And marketing is just, art and crafts, really.
So connecting the dots, I think is critical.
So when they looked at that, because that is when I hear those sort of numbers, $2 million of pipeline revenue, $1.2 million of quote or proposals. Now, whether that leads to a conversion conversation or a demo, whatever the case might be, they're pretty good percentage numbers, right? If you then have a 2% close rate on that, there's nothing wrong with the leads that are coming in. Presupposing, of course, that you as the marketing arm have done your due diligence to understand what does the ideal future customer look like for this organization, and you create that avatar. There's no excuses for having that amount of business on your doorstep to not convert.
Yeah.
And when I hear, oh, we're just going to incentivize people to, we're going to incentivize based on the number of demonstrations they do or the number of proposals they do, because their thinking probably is going to be, well, the activity will actually end up creating the result. You still have to have high quality salespeople who know when to close, who know when to ask the question to say, Mr. and Mrs. Customer, are you now ready to do business? Or the next step in the process is this. So what was the upshoot? Because the other thing you mentioned there is a 36-month sales cycle, and you're only 12 months into the relationship. You're probably sitting there thinking, are you kidding? So what was the final outcome of that? Presumably they're still with you.
Yeah, no, they decided to leave.
Oh, they left. Wow.
And they hired an outbound calling appointment setting company to get them more appointments. So, like I said earlier, sometimes it just goes back to culture. What is, if the company is committed to growth, how committed are they? And are they willing to solve all the problems? Our analytics, our data, the math was the math doesn't lie. Data doesn't lie.
Yeah.
Unless you put bad data in, but the data doesn't lie, obviously. So you have educated information to make, or you have the information to make an educated decision. They chose not to fix it.
Yeah.
So again, you start to think like, okay, well, is that an internal conflict? Is there something else going on that we don't know about? But we can't control that.
No, it's interesting you say that, because they would have gone to an external outbound, probably SDR type of organization who are creating all these appointments, but they're probably finding that their close rates are not improving.
Yeah, that would be my guess. Yeah.
Yeah, so not dealing with the core issue. And it's a really, really important lesson for sales leaders that you've got to work really closely with, and I think you've got to work hand in hand with the marketing team, because your marketing team and you should be able to provide a ubiquitous image or profile to the marketplace, and the
Yeah.
messaging has to be the same, because you need both. It's hand in glove sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And as you rightly say, the numbers don't lie. So if you're bringing in 2 million with a 1.2 million, conversion to opportunity to proposal, and you're converting 2% of that, then there's something fundamentally wrong in the sales process, or the way they're going about it. So the other thing I applaud you on, and this is not false platitude, is knowing probably when to walk away, to say, okay, this is probably not our ideal customer. If they choose not to see and take heed of the numbers that are in front of them, the factual numbers, then we can't control that. And I often say to salespeople, you're not there to convince anybody of anything. You have, I guess, the source. You have the elixir. People will choose as to whether they believe that is the elixir for them or not. And in
Yeah.
this case,
Right.
they probably didn't know what they had in front of them. But I guarantee at some point, now they'll probably never share this with you, but at some point down the track, they'll think, Jesus, I wish I hadn't got rid of Chris's organization. Now I can't go back to them because that's a pride thing.
Well, yeah, we would hope, right? Like, and I would hope they would come back if they felt differently, and maybe there were other factors, or there was something that we didn't know. You're only hearing one side of the story, but I think the methodology is what works. So, like,
Yeah.
another quick example, we had another client that we were driving a ton of leads for, and I always tell our customers, in about 9 months, I'll be able to tell you whether you have a marketing issue, a sales issue, or a value proposition issue.
Yeah.
And this customer, going back, we were driving a ton of all the marketing KPIs, the leads, qualified leads were all great. And I remember I traveled out to Chicago with some team members, and we were all like patting ourselves on the back. We're like, this is going to be a great meeting. We got in there, and the CEO just like unloaded on us in a bad way. Like, where's all my new business? And we also knew that their sales team was doing a great job. Like, they were following up on every lead. It was all logged in their CRM. And I told the owner, I said, you have a value proposition issue. And she got really mad at me because I called her baby ugly.
Yeah.
And but she listened.
Yeah.
And I said, this is why I think you have a value prop issue. And she got committed to fixing it, and they fixed it. And within 3 months, they started closing more business.
There you go.
A year and a half later, she exited the business and sold it and retired. And I'm proud of the fact that we were able to probably help get her a better multiple on that sale too.
Yeah.
We kept their company successful, and they sold to one of the other largest competitors in the US for what they did.
Nice. And that's a great example of, because you're going to have either presidents, CEOs, VP of sales, head of sales, whatever the case might be, chief revenue officers, that are going to be so protective of their own ecosystem, their environment, and their people, and rightly so, right?
Yeah.
But it's the ones that can actually see beyond that and say, okay, we've got a great methodology. We think we've got a great product, but we need to look at the data and look at it from a pragmatic point of view to say, is this working? And I know you talk a lot about things like whack-a-mole marketing, because there's a lot of hope and pray strategies out there. Let's throw as much as we can up against the wall, and hopefully some of it's going to stick, because we have a fantastic product. Why wouldn't every single customer in the known universe want to just buy our product? Because we are the best, we are the biggest, insert reason there. But it doesn't work like that, right? We have to understand buyer psychology. We have to understand, where do they sit in their cycle? Are they ready to buy now? Are they ready to buy in the next 3 months? What is it that they're looking for? What problem is it they want to solve? And that's why an organization such as yours can add so much value, because you're not just looking at the sales process, you're looking at what is it the customer's looking for and what is the problem in the marketplace, and then designing strategies so that there's a fit. So what should happen in good marketing strategies is a customer out there who you maybe have never heard of looks at the marketing and says, hey, that's me. That's the problem. I need to talk to these people. That's what you want to get to. So
Yeah.
I'd love to sort of segue now into talking about, well, the great 8 pillars, in terms of, you mentioned before that this was something that was quite intentional that you created, but I'm sure it's evolved over time as well.
Yeah.
Without giving away all of them, because we want people to obviously investigate and maybe buy the book. What are some of the key principles that formed the Great Eight Pillars?
Yeah, so I'll just tell you a quick story about how they came to be, which might shed some light on the thinking behind it. So 3 years ago, I hired a new vice president of client services here, and he was reviewing, his name is John. He's a co-author on the book. And John was reviewing our client case studies, and he said, Chris, I've worked at other marketing agencies. We're getting some amazing results. How are we doing this? This was right before COVID. So about 3 years ago, 3.5 almost. And I said, John, do you not believe the case studies? And he's like, well, I just haven't seen these kind of numbers before. So make a long story short, he asked me, how are we doing this? And I said, I don't know. I'll be honest. I'm like, I know we do strategies and every customer has a unique customized strategy. We don't have off the shelf like solutions. I know we do this and I know we do that. I'm like, but exactly how we're getting these results, I don't know. And he's like, we need to figure this out. So we spent almost 2 years going through every client we ever served. And I assessed not just the work we did, but their infrastructure, what the culture was like, what their marketing and sales infrastructure was like, their level of maturity in marketing and sales. And when we got through the process, we had narrowed it down to like 100 different areas of marketing. And then we eventually kept narrowing it down and categorizing it, and we got it down to 8. And we called it the Great Eight Pillars. And Darren, what really surprised us was it had the results and the potential to have like a 10x return on investment from your marketing had nothing to do with the marketing tactics that were being employed.
Okay.
It had to do with the operational infrastructure.
Interesting.
So, and what I found is most other marketing agencies jump straight to tactics.
Yeah.
Like, okay, we'll do some search engine optimization. We'll do some lead nurturing emails, social media, whatever it is. And if you do it without a marketing strategy, you're doomed for failure.
Mm.
So I'll just list them real quick what they are so you understand what the 8 pillars are. And I'm happy to dive into any of them. But
sure.
Number 1, and these are listed in order of importance.
Okay.
Are goals, KPIs, and industry benchmarks. So what is your marketing ROI goal? And in the book, we outline exactly how you define that. And our objective is to get a 10x ROI.
Yeah.
And we believe our customers should work to achieve that as well. Then you've got value proposition, messaging, and branding. That's number 2 for a reason. There's no sense in executing a marketing and sales program if your value proposition stinks.
Hence the comment you made to the CEO who said, "You're calling my baby ugly."
And we referenced that story in the book, but we had to learn it the hard way.
Yeah.
We should with that client, we didn't know at the time, but we should have started with that first. And if we had, we would have seen more success. So we adapted.
So just before you go to the third one, can I just ask you a question on that? Because in the work that I do with sales teams, I'm always talking to them about you've got a great product, that's fine, but understand that your customers are not actually waking up every single day wanting to buy your product. They're just not, right? And if you think that's the case, you're being quite respectfully delusional. So you need to try and create your value proposition. So how much of the work up front, like in the work that you guys do in terms of the marketing and the lead generation, do you now spend up front with the customer before you start doing any marketing to challenge them on what their value proposition is? Because I get that, or I sense that if an organization has a really strong message, brand, value proposition, they know what makes them unique in the marketplace, then that flows on to whatever tactics you're going to use in relation to your marketing strategy. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah. So we do a diagnostic of our clients up front. So we do a diagnostic across the 8 pillars, and we've identified over 100 gold standards.
Okay.
Those gold standards are all in the book as well. And so when we assess our clients or do the diagnostic, we're going to know what they're doing well and what they're not. And one of those things is the value prop. So if we've identified that their value prop is not well articulated or differentiated in the market, we're going to spend the first 30 to 45 days of our engagement working on that.
Okay.
and finding out, who they are, what they do, and why it matters, and how is it different than their competitors.
Yeah.
And does that align with their ideal customers and what their needs are of those customers? The customers' needs are of them.
Nice. Because if you don't do that, it then becomes just a whack-a-mole game, doesn't it?
It does. Yep.
Yeah. Love it. Love it. Sorry, I interrupted you. What was number 3?
Number 3 is marketing strategy. So you got to have a strategy. Darren, we've worked with hundreds of companies over 20 years. Not one company has come to me and said, here's our existing marketing strategy. Can you help us implement it? Not one.
Wow.
Does
that mean they don't have them?
They didn't have them. So marketing strategy is critical. That's number 3. Number 4 is your marketing team. Do you have the right team in place to pull off the strategy? And that could be internal or external. That's number 4. Number 5 is your website. That website needs to be a lead generation machine that communicates your value proposition and has conversion components and has the back end for lead generation and cataloging all this. Number 6 is analytics and reporting. Do you have are you reporting on the KPIs? Are you tracking your goals? Do you have the right data to track your efforts? Number 7 is software and technology. So a tool like HubSpot or a CRM like Salesforce or HubSpot, or another marketing automation software that is your choice. And then last but not least are templates and guides. Do you have templates and guidelines and guides that are going to make you more efficient so you're not reinventing the wheel over and over and over again, which leads to the profitability and speed of implementation.
Yeah. And you mentioned before, Chris, that was in the order of importance. And what's really interesting, and as I look at that, how many organizations kind of flip it and they say, we need the guidelines, we need the blueprint, we need to follow the process, and we need to try and bring some technology in, thinking that was going to be the enabler. But if you flip that, and rightly so, you talk about, well, first of all, you got to know what the end game looks like. What's the success look like? What are the benchmarks? What are the KPIs that are measurable?
Yeah.
And then think about your value proposition. As you listed those out, and I'm looking through the list, it sounds logical, and it is logical. But I'll be interested in your experience over 20 years and through the process of, I guess, identifying these out of the hundreds of things you could have looked at. How many organizations that you come up against in terms of starting to engage with don't have these things in place?
Most of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, even enterprise level organizations, they have varying levels.
Yeah.
So like some companies I work with have amazing value propositions. They just aren't well articulated. Which just takes them to another level. Or they've got a really good website, but they don't have the analytics and reporting to track it. So most organizations have varying levels in each of those areas. That's why we do the diagnostic up front to say, hey, here's your low-hanging fruit as to what we can improve quickly and drive results faster.
Yeah.
And here are the bigger things that we need to fix over time.
Yeah. I'm just wondering how many of those, I mean, a lot of organizations, if not all organizations, would have some sort of goal. They would know they would have a target or some sort of aspiration as to what they want to achieve. But if you break down goals and industry benchmarks, how much of the work that you do then is about not so much challenging that goal, whether they've set them high enough or they're too high or whatever the case might be, but within that realm of goals, KPIs, industry benchmarks, ROIs, getting really specific on, are there any more important KPIs than others when it comes to that first pillar? So what I'm thinking about there is we want to grow our business by 25% this year, profitability, et cetera, but that's the top line, I guess, goal, desire. But if they don't have anything underneath that, because part of it would be cost base, and return on investment around that. Are there any thoughts on that in terms of what you're seeing?
Yeah. So one thing we see is pretty consistent is that what companies value from marketing varies from company to company. For some, it's lead generation.
Mm.
It's like, hey, I'm going to value marketing's work purely on the amount of leads we get. I think that's a little short-sighted.
Yeah.
Short-sighted, I should say, because marketing can have a huge influence in ways that aren't quantifiable. But when you're talking about ROI-driven marketing, yes, you want to be able to track first point of contact with a new customer all the way through closed sale, and how that maps out. But marketing can also have an impact on average customer order size, customer lifetime value, customer retention, cross-selling and upselling. It's all communications.
Yeah.
And some customers value like more consulting, like just helping us get the system in place. So it does vary from company to company, and you really have to make sure. And that's why we want to make sure we have that marketing strategy with the goals up front, because if your goal is not lead gen, what is your goal?
Yes.
How are you going to measure success of marketing? And that may change over time as well, as it should.
Yeah.
As the maturity level, like we'll tell some customers, like if they have a very immature marketing infrastructure, we'll say, we're not even talking about an ROI goal for you. Like you're so far away from tracking ROI, like you need to get these basics in place.
Yeah.
So let's do that.
Yeah. And for some, it could be you just need to get customers in paying you, and then you work on a retention strategy. Then we can start measuring all the other bits and pieces.
Yeah.
So the next question I had then is based on that, and you go to the next point, the value proposition, the messaging, and the branding. My experience with a lot of organizations is and rightly so, they believe wholly and solely in their product, their solution, their service, and they go out there to the marketplace. The problem with a lot of them, though, is they believe so much in their own products that they almost have blind spots as to whether this is really what the market needs. So in your experience, and maybe you draw upon that example you shared with that lady who sold and retired, when you come in and you see that the value proposition perhaps is not where it needs to be, what are some of the key things that you've seen that I guess are inputs into a value proposition that can really help an organization take advantage of then the marketing strategy, because they've now got a really clear review on what does make them unique?
That's a great question. When it comes to value proposition, messaging, and branding, I always try to keep it simple and say, when you're, and I'm speaking specifically for a business to business sale.
Yeah.
You have multiple buyers that a seller is selling to. So you've got a financial buyer, you've got an end user buyer, you've got maybe a growth buyer. You've got usually at least 3 different mindsets on your customer that you have to sell to.
Yeah.
And to make it super simple is they have to have a really good gut feeling about your business and your offering. So how do you influence that gut feeling? And I think that's the important part. So value proposition is one, right? Are you differentiated in the market? And how do you check that? You look at your competitors. What services, products, what are they doing? And look at your buyer's pain points. Why does a customer or a buyer go from one vendor or supplier to another? It's usually because they failed somewhere. So where are they typically failing? Is it in pricing? Is it in delivery? Is it in quality? Or do you have a product or service that's so unique that nobody else has it?
Yeah.
So figure that out. Then we talk about messaging. So are you telling your corporate story effectively? Most websites, if you're listening to this podcast and you're from a business, and you're in sales, go to your company's website. And if the website says, we do this, we do this, we do this, we've been in business for X amount of years, and we have great customer service, I guarantee you, you're not differentiated, and you're not addressing, you're saying what you do.
Yeah.
You're not addressing your buyers' pain points and why they should choose you. And then branding is, to simplify branding, branding is very complex in and of itself. Let's just simplify it down to visual, just the look and feel. If it doesn't look super professional and represent your organization, guess what? That gut feeling that your prospect has is not going to be good.
Yeah.
It's going to be that little bit of doubt. So you got to check all these boxes.
It's as you were talking about that, I was just reflecting on some of the proposals that I had to review back when I was in corporate. And you look at the executive summary, and I used to have to literally got a red pen and started to cross stuff out because our company would be mentioned in just the executive summary by a factor of sometimes 5 to 1 or 10 to 1 compared to the customer's company name in the executive summary. And essentially, what you're talking about there is if your website makes it all about you, then when somebody and a prospective customer reads that, they're thinking, well, that's all about them. You're not talking to me at all. Yeah. So from a branding point of view and a value proposition point of view, it's all about the customer. If you put yourself in the shoes of the customer to the point when they're reading marketing material from you or company information about you, they put themselves in that shoe because it speaks directly to them. And from a psychological point of view, they can't help but lean in and say, I want to know more about this organization and explore potentially whether they can help me or not. Yeah. That's gold. But why do you think it is that most organizations make it all about themselves?
I think because they just don't have the knowledge. Sometimes companies build their websites in-house, or they hire an agency and they go for the lowest cost provider.
Yeah.
And, that's fine. You got to do what you got to do at different stages of the business. And I'm not knocking that, but I'm just saying, like, websites, marketing, sales, it's a pretty complex system.
Yeah.
And having professionals help you build that system, if you're in growth mode and you're committed to growth and scaling the organization, it should be an investment that pays for itself.
Yeah.
And if you skimp on it, you're just not going to get the results.
Yeah.
I real quick there, I had a client or prospect I was on the phone with yesterday, transportation and logistics company. And they said, hey, Chris, what's cost for your services? And I said, well, we have consulting and workshops that we do at a project fee. I go, and then we usually are working in a retainer relationship with our customers on a monthly retainer. And those retainers go from anywhere from $4,000 a month. We have clients that are well over 20,000 a month.
Yeah.
And they said, okay, well, I'll tell you what we'll do is we'll start at 4, and then if it works, we'll add more. And that's a very common proposal I get. And yep. I said, it doesn't work that way. Because at 4,000 a month, you're really not looking at a lead generation program. You're not looking at an ROI generation program. You're looking at a maintenance. I mean, think about here in the States, if you were to hire a marketer right out of college, it's probably going to cost, with a marketing degree, somewhere between $50,000 and $60,000 a year.
Yeah.
So if you're going to pay an agency to do your marketing at $4,000, $48,000 a year, you're not even getting the equivalent of somebody right out of school. You need mind share.
Yeah.
If you're looking to scale. So I always recommend invest at the level that is going to help you to hit your goal. And the right agency like SyncShow will know what that level is and be able to tell you what the expectation is for your investment.
Yeah.
And then if it doesn't work, use the data to inform how you change.
Yes. So. And how many of those, because it sounds like, oh, we'll just start at $4,000, or when they just asking the question, so how much does it cost your services? It's almost like, well, it's the wrong question, right? How important is the growth of your business and the sustainability of your revenue line? That's the different question. And therefore, what are you wanting to invest in making sure that happens?
Yeah.
Because it's a partnership. And the thing that and I'm always talking to sales teams about this. You've got to look at building partnerships with your customers. It's not a them and us. It's not a customer and a supplier. So don't think of yourself as a supplier. Think of yourself as an enabler. You need to be part of your customer's organization and almost be an insider in that organization so you can help them develop
Yeah.
and improve. And so you're probably in a situation where you hear that sort of stuff and you just have a bit of a chuckle to yourself to say, you guys have no idea, do you? Which
I
is
need you
probably,
to, I
eh?
need you to sit on my sales calls with me.
Well, it's fascinating because you're probably sitting there thinking, well, this is probably not going to be a great customer for us, is if their focus is on the cost and almost wanting a guarantee that if this works, then we'll look at what we can do. Are they really serious about the growth of their business, or do they know what they need to do in order to grow their business?
I think it's more the latter, or for many of the industrial companies that we serve, marketing is still a little bit of smoke and mirrors
Mm,
in their minds. You know, a lot of B2B companies have sold on relationships for 40, 50, 100 years.
yeah,
And it's hard for them to see that transition. So part of it is they're inquisitive and they hear their competitors are doing this, and they hear marketing works, but the truth is not all agencies are wired the way we are. So they go and they hire a marketing agency, and then they invest $50,000 and it doesn't work and they get zero ROI, and they're like very skeptical to do it in the future.
yeah,
So what they don't necessarily always realize is that there's different levels of the game. And so I try not to sell them clients on the concept of marketing. I try to, because if I have to convince them that they have to do marketing, then they're not the right client.
yeah,
But if they know that marketing can be successful and they've experienced that and they want to take it to a new level, that's when it gets exciting.
yeah. Because they also know that this is not um, a short-term fix. It's not an instant gratification thing. You just can't wave the magic wand and all of a sudden all these leads come in.
Yeah.
There has to be a ramp-up phase, right? Um, and so that's when the marketing strategy comes into it really strongly. So in terms of the third pillar, the marketing strategy, how important is that, particularly when you're working with an organization, that you collaborate on that? And because I'm sure there'll be a lot of organizations that you do engage with that when you start to work with them, you quickly realize that they might have the bones of a marketing strategy, but essentially they don't have one, right? Maybe they've had the hope and pray strategy in the past and it just hasn't worked. And so they've got a natural level of skepticism around marketing agencies and external lead generation agencies, and therefore they're coming from a position of defense versus a position of collaboration. So,
Yeah.
how important is the marketing strategy um, that you and the organization sit down and work together to develop that? And based on that relationship, you should be able to have some really poignant conversations around that. So, from your experience, if you get the marketing strategy right, what tends to happen from that?
Yeah. So sounded like a couple questions there, but one, the marketing strategy is critical. And if you are working with SyncShow, it's mandatory. um, and when we build marketing strategies, we don't do that on an island. We have face-to-face workshops on site, preferably with the key stakeholders at our customers. And those key stakeholders are typically senior leadership at the C-suite level, senior leadership in sales, senior leadership in marketing if they have it, and senior leadership in customer service. And we workshop together the ideal customer profiles, the buyer personas of their customers. We map out and we talk about their target markets. And what you'll find is that in many companies, especially on the smaller growth trajectory companies that have not quite as mature sales infrastructures either, getting them together is the first time they've done it in years. And so they're like, oh my gosh, this is fantastic. And you start to have sales folks go, I thought we were doing this, or I thought we were doing this. I remember once we were working with a company. We had 12 of their staff members in the workshop. And the president walked in and he saw on our agenda, it said ideal customer profile is one of the first things we were going to do. He's like, Chris, this is easy. He goes, we serve billion-dollar nonprofits as our main focus. I said, great. You know, we're going to dive into that. We got into the meeting. The other 11 members of his team, when asked individually what their ideal customer was, not one person said a billion-dollar nonprofit.
Wow.
No one even mentioned nonprofit.
Okay.
So there was extreme deviation on who they were going to market to sell to. So just pulling together and doing that strategy is fantastic. And then once you have that strategy, the results, because you're following a plan,
Yeah.
the results are compounded. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
Well, it's a blueprint, right? So, and as you're talking about that, I'm watching. You might have seen it, the Netflix show Quarterback, and it follows
No.
It's a fantastic show, and I mean, I like American football, but I love documentaries about it that go deeper. Just the marketing plan from a football club perspective and all the different plays, they have to be really clear on what each play looks like and what the result is. So they have to follow a blueprint and they have to remember it, right? To have team members who have different ideas as to what each play represents means it's chaos, right? And it will get the results based on chaos, and it will be nowhere near the results that you should be getting. So getting everybody on the same page is absolutely critical. And just simple things like defining for each person, what is your ideal customer avatar? What are their characteristics? If there's deviation with that, because each of those heads of department will then have conversations with their groups, and therefore their different version of what they think is the ideal customer will now create even wider gaps in the business and create uncertainty. You've got to get it. You've got to get it right.
Yep. Yeah.
Wow. So, mate, this has been a fantastic conversation. I know we're close to end of time. Any other key points that are top of mind for you out of the 8 pillars that you think might be beneficial to put on the table?
I would just recommend, any organization that's in growth mode, maybe struggling for that growth, look at your operational infrastructure. Don't jump straight to tactics. It very rarely works. You'll waste a lot of time and money on marketing and sales efforts that don't work. So get a strategy in place. Make sure you have the operational infrastructure in place, and focus on that value proposition. One of the scariest things about going through the value proposition exercise is when you get done with it and you realize you don't have a strong value prop.
Yeah.
But don't panic. I mean, my company was there in its early times. Be intentional about who you are and where you want to go, and then work over time. Maybe it's years to define and establish that value proposition and be differentiated in the market.
Yeah.
And it's going to pay dividends down the road.
Well, it will. And there's a lot of organizations, and I guess a lot of individuals who will be under pressure to just do things, right? So people talk about, take action, but it needs to be specific action. But if you're taking action in the wrong areas, or you're not quite clear on what your purpose is, what your value prop is, then you're not going to get the greatest results. So take some time, invest. And if that means a day a week, you sit down and you strategize and you really think and unpack everything and just question yourself, do we have the right solutions in place? Do we have the right customer focus? Are we dealing with the right industry? Just all these sort of questions will set you up for long-term success, because once you've got that in place, then it becomes the execution phase that you're more likely to get much better results because it's a lot more intentional.
Yeah.
Love it.
And David, too, I think it's worth mentioning. So my book, The Great Pillars, is available on Amazon. It is geared for manufacturing companies, but the framework and the methodology, the Great 8 Pillars, works for all B2B companies.
Yeah.
And if you go to the letter G, the number 8, the letter P, so g8p.co, we have a resources section where you can download all the tools we use when working with our clients, and you can do it yourself, or you can try to do it yourself. There are templates and guides and videos. We even have a certification program available for marketers. So if you need a discount code, let me know. Happy to give you any of your listeners a free certification course. There's a lot of free resources that we provide to help you do it.
Fantastic. Mate, you preempted my next question, which was, where can people get hold of you, connect with you, and learn more about what you do? So G8P.co is the place. And presumably for people wanting to connect directly with you, places like LinkedIn.
Yeah, LinkedIn's great. Also chrispeer.com or syncshow.com. Syncshow is my marketing agency.
Yep.
G8P is the methodology, and then my personal speaking and workshop website is chrispeer.com.
Awesome. And by the way, you probably find there's an invitation from a guy from Australia waiting for you to be accepted in your LinkedIn. So
awesome.
All good. Hey mate, absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. I'll put that information in the show notes. And thanks for being a guest on the Exceptional Sales Leader podcast.
Thanks, Darren. It's been great.
All the best, mate.
See you.
Thank you for listening to the Exceptional Sales Leader podcast. I trust the information in this episode has been helpful in your journey towards becoming exceptional. And remember, please take the time to rate the show, subscribe to the show so other people can find it. But also, if I can help you, jump on my calendar, go to leadwithdarren.com and let's have a conversation about how I can help you along your journey to being exceptional.